You're live here. Politics Now on BBC One as we're joined by Laura Kuenssberg.
Hello, it's been another week of You Couldn't Make It Up, as the election, when tens of millions of us will vote, comes ever closer. In a truth stranger than fiction, Rishi Sunak is again this morning having to deal with a scandal over Tories allegedly placing bets on the date of the election. Keir Starmer has not been free of awkward moments this week, but in comparison, his campaign has been cruising. Nigel Farage's candidates and his comments on Ukraine have been causing him trouble. But it has been a busy week all round, and in the latest of our leader interviews, we'll be talking to the SNP's Scottish First Minister, John Swinney, who is again promising to pursue independence. But with us in the studio for Labour and the Conservatives, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, and Bridget Phillipson, who in a couple of weeks' time hopes to be the Education Secretary. 11 days to go. Are you feeling tired, exhausted, relieved that it's nearly over, James?
Well, at least the sun's come out. I got to wear shorts the other day, which I know, like small mercies in elections, but I like electioneering, so I don't mind.
So those shorts, you're hoping to get more votes with or without, with the shorts?
I think I might have put some people off.
And Bridget, how about you? How are you feeling now?
Yeah, the sun is shining, but nothing is settled. And if people want change, they've got to go and vote for it. OK, we're about 1 minute in and we've got a slogan already. We'll talk to both of you later on. Remember, of course, this election is not just about a contest between the big two. Sir John Curtis, with his polling calculator, will keep us right.
All these megapolls said Conservative support is falling most heavily in constituencies the party is defending, compounding its losses.
And our team at the desk for the next hour and 15 minutes this week: Philip Hammond, the former Conservative Chancellor, Defence Secretary and Foreign Secretary; Lord Peter Mandelson from Labour, former Minister too; and the broadcaster Susanna Reid. Welcome to all three of you. Morning. Not long now. So let's start with the news, as we always do. The Sunday Times is splashing on a fourth Conservative allegedly being looked into by the Gambling Commission over election bets. Like quite a few of the papers, they also have the royal selfie with Taylor Swift. The Mail on Sunday says President Zelensky believes Nigel Farage has been infected with the virus of Putin. The Sunday Mirror today goes on the Prime Minister's family's wealth, saying the Rishi get richer. And the Observer says economists, some of them, believe Labour will not get the growth in the economy they want without closer ties to the EU. And on the Sunday Mail in Scotland, Scotland's First Minister, John Swinney, where there are claims that the SNP has been using taxpayer-funded stamps for campaigning. And our website on BBC News, we've been passed a recording of a Tory candidate and aide to the Home Secretary saying the Rwanda policy is crap. So, a busy news morning with a lot going on. Philip Hammond, welcome to all of you this morning. Do you ever wonder if your party's actually trying to sabotage its own campaign?
Well, look, it's a difficult campaign to run because it's against the backdrop of the Boris Johnson period in government, the Liz Truss debacle. And frankly, my own personal view is that many voters made up their mind back in 2021, 2022, by the autumn of 2022, the die was cast. So I think Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have done a credible job in government, but they are unfortunately are being held to account for the mistakes and the errors that were made earlier on in this period of government.
When you backed Rishi Sunak when it came to choosing the next Conservative leader, but a lot of your colleagues, though, do say, actually, he's made things worse, and the way the campaign's been handled might suggest to a lot of our viewers that's true.
I backed Rishi Sunak because the alternative was Liz Truss, and I think I've probably been vindicated on that. On that choice.
But in terms of how they've been running things in the last month or so, I mean, they were meant to be the ones who had a plan for the election because they called it when other people didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally understand why we're having an election in July. I would have liked to have seen the election later in the year. I'm pretty confident that we will see 1 or 2 interest rate cuts between now and November. And I would have been preferred the party to have been fighting this election on the basis of interest rates falling and probably on the basis of Mr Farage having disappeared off to the US to play games with candidate Trump as well.
Lord
That would have been a better backdrop from my point of view.
Lord Brandelson, we've heard interesting messages coming out of the Labour campaign in the last day or so, shifting to telling people this isn't in the bag, it's not in the bag. Do you believe the polls?
I don't believe the polls for one moment. I mean, especially these new pseudo-scientific MRP polls, which are essentially sort of looking through a rear-view mirror and trying to anticipate how people are going to make up their minds in 2 weeks or however long it is. It seems like an eternity's time. The fact is that many people are uncertain. Some are undecided, some are doubtful, others are leaning one way or another but haven't finally made up their mind. And that's why the polls, in a sense, are dangerous. They generate, if you're not careful, a sense of complacency, that it's all in the bag. It isn't. And that's why, as Bridget Phillipson was saying, if people want change in the country, they're actually going to have to go out and vote for it.
Is that really the case, though? I mean, you've had Philip Hammond saying there the die was cast ages ago. Isn't this actually just classic now tactics from Labour to get the vote out, which people always do at this stage?
I don't think it's a tactic. I think it's an observation that if people do not go out and actually vote, you will not get the change of government we need. After 14 years, all this has gone on. I mean, if you take the betting story today, the reason you've got all this going on is because they've been in power for too long. They've been in power for too long, by the way, for a good spell without a proper opposition under Jeremy Corbyn. Now they do face an effective alternative and opposition, and people just look at the brand of the Conservatives, say they have absolutely no interest in taking laws or norms or rules or whatever. They think they can do whatever they like. Well, it is time to go.
Susanna, what has been standing out for your viewers? Because, you know, every day you've been covering this election.
Yeah.
We've heard about this big picture politics, but the issues are really important.
Hugely important. And I think there's a huge number of people who are simply undecided or unconvinced, or in some cases uninspired to even go and vote. And I think that's a huge problem. I think people are continuously worried about the cost of living, about education, about massive NHS waiting lists, about crime, about immigration. And I think that they look at what the politicians are saying and they're just not sure whether they're being honest, transparent about how those plans are going to be paid for.
And that applies to all of them, in your view?
Well, I think there's a sense that after 14 years of the Conservatives being in government, nothing works amongst some people and that things are broken. And it's remarkable, isn't it, that we hear from Lord Hammond, who last time I checked was a Conservative, who is critical of Prime Ministers of the same party over the last 14 years. And when it comes to the opposition, you know, huge things need to change and they're just not sure that those things are going to change, that things are going to improve. Because where is the money for it?
OK, well, that's one of the things I'm sure we'll get into later. All three of you, thank you very much indeed for now. Let's get on with our first interview of the morning. Months ago, you will all remember, the Prime Minister chose "Stop the Boats" as one of his top slogans. It was emblazoned everywhere, lecterns, posters all over the place. The government's plan to send people arriving in the UK without permission to Africa, the country of Rwanda, was stuck at the top of the political agenda. But the boats have not stopped. Only 2 migrants have gone to Rwanda and they have gone voluntarily. So let's talk about all of that with the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, who's with us. Now, Home Secretary, one of your aides, whose job it has been for 2 years to help you get the government's plan to send migrants to Rwanda fully enacted, was recorded giving this opinion about the scheme. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Nobody's got the cameras on, have they? Phones on. The policy's crap. Okay? It's crap. But it's not about the policy. It's about the effect of the policy. Yes. This is second and third order effects. In Australia, for example, a similar policy had a devastating effect. There is no doubt at all that when those first flights take off, it will send such a shockwave across the channel that the gangs will stop.
So the policy is crap, according to one of your own team.
Yeah, but actually, and I'm glad you played, and thank you. I think it's important that you played the whole answer. And I know James has worked incredibly hard on the policy getting the Safety of the Rwanda bill through. And whilst the opening words were clearly designed to, shock and grab the attention of the audience. The point he made was absolutely right in the latter part of the quote, which is the effect, the deterrent effect on the people smuggling gangs and the people they're trying to make money from is what we are seeking to achieve. And he's absolutely right that in other places where that deterrent's been put in place, most famously Australia, it's been having effect. And indeed, a number of other European countries are exploring third country processing arrangements similar to Rwanda. And the only people seemingly that are heading in the other direction is Labour. So whilst a lot of other countries are now exploring plans like Rwanda, Labour are the ones saying they're going to scrap it, even though the deterrent effect is already starting to have an impact.
Well, we'll come to the deterrent effect in a second, because actually the numbers are extremely high right now. But one of your own team told a friendly private audience, when he didn't realise he was being recorded, that he thought the policy was crap.
Yeah, but we've just heard the point he made. And as I say, he clearly said that to grab the attention of the audience.
Why would you do that with a private, friendly audience of Conservative supporters?
So, as I say, I'm glad you played the full quote, because the full quote made it absolutely clear that James, I know how committed he is to this policy, because he worked tirelessly with the rest of the team to try and get the bill through the House so we could implement it. He said, and people can re-listen to it, when the flights take off, it will send a shockwave across the channel. The deterrent will dissuade the people smuggling gangs and dissuade the people that they're preying upon to make money. And that is the point. He said it's the effect. Now, why he picked the word crap, I don't particularly know.
But what's crap about it then?
But he made the point that when those flights take off, and they will only take off under the Conservatives, there will be I think they used the word shockwave across the channel, and that is exactly the point.
Well, you can't guarantee that those flights will take off, even if you do manage to hang on in this general election.
Well, I can guarantee under Labour they won't, because
you cannot guarantee
the
that
Labour
they will.
leadership have said that even if it is working, they're going to scrap it.
And we'll talk to Labour later in the programme. And throughout this election campaign, what our viewers clearly want us to do is to concentrate on the policies of each party when we're speaking to them.
So Labour won't be allowed to talk about the Conservatives?
The problem with all of this is that one of your team, when he was speaking privately, said the policy was crap.
But it said that it would send a shockwave across the channel.
You yourself said that the policy was something too rude to say on TV at 9 in the morning. Unless you want to deny that now. Do you want to deny that?
That is what Yvette Cooper has been saying. I've been absolutely consistent that where I have had frustrations, it is because we spoke almost exclusively about Rwanda and we didn't speak about things like the Small Boats Operation Command, which has been up and running for over a year, that Yvette Cooper seems not to understand.
It's an important point, because
or
it's been
immigration
reported,
enforcement.
It's been reported many times, and until now you have not denied that you used a very rude word to describe the policy. Are you now denying that?
What I've said, and I've said this before, this is not you, I said this in an interview, I think within days of being appointed, that my frustration, and if I have used intemperate language, it's because my frustration was that I think as a government we spoke exclusively about one policy and didn't speak about all the other things like immigration enforcement, who send dozens of people every single week, sometimes hundreds, deported who have no right to be here. And we didn't talk about that, which is perhaps why Yvette Cooper is thinking about having this new, allegedly new returns unit, which is exactly what immigration enforcement already does, and a border command, which is exactly what the Small Boats Operation.
And I'll repeat for our audience, we'll be talking to Labour later later in the programme. But if your policy is so effective,
pre-existing functions,
if your policy is so effective, and you believe that it is a deterrent and will be a deterrent, why did almost 900 people arrive across the Channel on Tuesday?
Well, there's always a whole load of complicated factors. What we actually saw in the weeks leading up to those figures, and they're disappointing and frustrating figures, an extended period of good weather where almost no one came across the Channel. So if you're going to report the bad days, you should also report the good days.
Okay, let's look at another figure.
You should also report the fact that because of the arrangement that we have with the French coastal authorities, they were stopping hundreds of people attempting to cross. Again, figures that aren't reported. So we need to look at these things in the round.
Well, if
But
it's
the
so
point is,
effective
we are
and it's going so well,
But
why
my
have
final
more than
point, we
12...
are-
No,
Go
forgive
on.
me.
Okay, go
Why
on.
have more than 12,000 people crossed so far this year, up on the same period in the last 4 years? 12,000 people this year.
Well, the people smugglers are constantly changing their tactics. One of the things that worries me the most is that they are forcing more and more people into boats, which is why we've sadly seen fatalities, including some very young people, because the people smugglers changing their tactics. But we are applying pressure. We are committed to doing so. And the point is, at elections, it's about choices. And we are committed to stopping the boats, and we are committed...
But the point is that commitment is obviously not working.
But this is the point I'm going to make. So we are committed to constantly evolve. This is why Rwanda is so important, because you cannot credibly say that you will do less. And this is the Labour Party's position. They've said they are going to do less and somehow achieve more. And it's just not credible.
Home Secretary, our viewers want us to talk about your policies and your record. Now, 12,000 people have crossed the Channel in small boats so far this year, up on previous years, even though for more than 2 years, your party has been talking about this Rwanda plan, you've been saying you're committed to it, you have been pushing various different pieces of legislation through Parliament. And in this era of social media and smartphones, people coming to this country have heard about this policy of trying to send people to Rwanda, and yet the numbers are still going up. There is not evidence that this is working as a deterrent, even if you do ever manage to get a plane off the ground.
Well, I remember reports not that long ago where the Irish government were very uncomfortable because they were seeing people come into their country because they did not want to be sent to Rwanda.
And they've still crossed the Channel to do that. And if what you say is you want to stop the Channel crossings because you think it's dangerous, you think it's terrible for vulnerable people, they're still crossing the Channel, even if they then go onto Ireland. And this is why the deterrent of Rwanda, this is why and this is the point that James was making, when those first flights take off, it will have a shockwave. The point is, we and other European nations who are also struggling with the numbers of people that the people smugglers are pushing through the European countries. We work together. I speak regularly still, even though there's election called, I still converse regularly with interior ministers across Europe. This is a Europe-wide challenge. And the point is, we are constantly evolving our response. And your response has not been working. And your plan
but Laura, please let me
for
finish the
Rwanda...
point. Please let me finish the point, because this is really key. We have constantly been evolving our response in close coordination with Europeans and others, which is why the number of people that have been stopped has also increased. But the point I'm making, and then I will stop, I promise, the point I'm making is one of the responses to the people smugglers changing tactics is the Rwanda scheme. And Labour say they will scrap it, which means they are going to do less and somehow hope to achieve more.
And you've made that point already. And you've made that
but
point.
That's just not credible.
You've made that point already, and it's a point that we have discussed on several occasions with the Labour Party. The point is that this plan has not had a deterrent effect. The numbers are going up. You have no guarantee that a plane will take off. There are around a dozen challenges lodged in British courts to this. How can you tell our viewers with any credibility that you can be sure that planes will take off if you manage to hang on at the election?
Well, one of the reasons that we have utilised the voluntary returns, those people that have already gone across to Rwanda, it is a proof of concept. It shows that the receiving end of the system is working. They are safe. The feedback we have, and I'm not going to go into details because it would be inappropriate.
Hang on, you're trying to use the example of two people, when you've got an asylum backlog of more than 100,000 people. Two people going voluntarily in a different scheme. You're trying to use that as evidence that it would work.
Laura, if you let me finish the answer, you'd understand the point I'm trying to make, because it's not about the volume of people, it's proof of the safety of Rwanda, because that is the legal sticking point we've had in the past. Rwanda has demonstrated and is demonstrating both to the refugees that the United Nations sent to Rwanda and the ones that have come from the UK that they are a safe, welcoming country. That undermines the legal argument against the flights. That's why it's important. It's not the numbers of people, it's that they prove the concept that Rwanda is a safe country.
Okay, well, it'll be very interesting to see
which undermines the legal argument.
It'll be very interesting to see what the courts say, because there are 12 challenges, around a dozen challenges in the British courts on whether or not this is a legal scheme. But we've got lots of other things we want to talk to you about. One thing that's very important to some viewers that the government didn't deliver before calling the election is what's known as Martin's Law.
Yeah.
Now, that was suggested after the Manchester Arena bomb, named after Martin Hett, who died in that attack. And I know viewers might remember you met with his mother the day the election was called. And here's a picture of that meeting taking place. Now, in your manifesto, you have promised urgently to introduce it. But what does that mean? Would you do it within the first 100 days if you hang on?
So I met Martin's family and campaigners, and I said at the time that if, and I was quite clear, that if for whatever reason we weren't able to get that law passed in this Parliament, at that meeting I didn't know that the election was going to be called. But I said, if there is a delay because of an election, the Conservatives would absolutely prioritise this immediately upon reforming a government.
So that would be, if you managed to hang on, that would be in the King's speech, you would do it straight away?
Absolute commitment to do this straight away, because they have been waiting a long time, too long.
They have.
It is a policy where we need to get the balance right. We need to make sure those bigger venues who have the resources and the capability are properly defending the people who come to those venues. But also we want to make sure the little music venues in the back room of a pub or whatever are viable. And that was part of the delay. But we are absolutely committed. I made this point at the time. We're absolutely committed to get this law in the statute books as an absolute priority.
One of the other things that the families of victims of terror attacks have asked for many years is what's known as a survivor's charter. So a promise for compensation, support with mental health in the wake of something terrible. And families like the family of the murdered MP Joe Cox have been involved in that campaign for that survivor's charter. Would you give a similar commitment, finally, to get that done? They've been appealing to Rishi Sunak in the last 2 days.
Well, look, I want to look at the details. That is very...
We've been asking for it for years.
Yes,
the details are pretty clear.
But the point that I've seen as Home Secretary is circumstances are very different from one to another. Having a kind of a universal offer, by definition, would mean it's less tailored to the individual circumstances of those people who survived. And when you have gone through something as horrific as a terrorist attack, I would want to make sure that the response is bespoke to the individuals rather than general. I can understand the benefits to both. I'm not completely convinced that a kind of a one-size-fits-all offer is the most appropriate way we move forward, but I'm absolutely committed to make sure that the survivors of terror and their families have the appropriate support.
OK. To your knowledge, Home Secretary, did any ministers put a bet on the timing of the election?
Not to my knowledge at all, no.
What do you say to our viewers who hear another set of allegations about another Conservative, the head of data, Nick Mason, who's been looked into by the Gambling Commission? He's denied wrongdoing, but he's being looked into for placing bets on the time of the election. So
the Gambling Commission have made it very clear that we should not discuss this investigation. I intend to abide by the explicit instructions of the Gambling Commission, which is not to discuss this. And I know that's going to be frustrating, but they've made it clear that we shouldn't, and I'm going to stick to that. But two of the people who are in the Sunday Times reporting of this latest story this morning, and also the BBC we've been reporting on the last few days, two of them are standing to become Conservative MPs. Don't you think that voters actually have a right to know whether you are going to do anything about it? Well, look, So there is a system, there's a process. The Gambling Commission are doing the investigation, that is appropriate. When, in other circumstances, when Keir Starmer was being investigated, when Angela Rayner was being investigated, they both said they would stay in place until the culmination of that investigation. I think that is the right and appropriate way forward. Are you not bothered then? Rishi Sunak said that he's terribly angry about what's happened.
What do you think about it? I mean, Michael Gove has said this is like Partygate.
No. So I've been clear. I have been absolutely clear that from what I have read, I am not in any way going to defend the actions of these individuals. But I'm also conscious that I don't have the full details. The only organisation that does is the Gambling Commission, and it is right that they take action, whatever the appropriate action. And they have been clear that we should not discuss this. And I'm going to abide by their instructions. Except
that Rishi Sunak, when he became Prime Minister, stood outside Downing Street after all of the turmoil under Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and he told the country, I will run a government with the highest standards of integrity and accountability. Would the public have a right to feel terribly let down and frankly sick of what they've seen in the last few days? Well, as I say, the Gambling Commission are investigating this, and it's right that they it is right that they take action, and depending on the result of their investigation, decisions will be made at that point. But the point that I've said is I think it is right and appropriate that we let them do their job. And again, I know this is frustrating for you and almost certainly frustrating for your viewers as well, but they've given really clear instructions that we should not discuss this, which is putting me in a difficult position in this interview. I'm not frustrated, I'm just interested to whether or not you want to tell our viewers that this is something you really disapprove of, or maybe you even want to apologise to people for what appears to be yet another set of allegations about bad behaviour in the Conservative Party. And that's the point. So you're asking me to comment on something that appears to be the case. Rishi Sunak's commented. I've said, and again, I mean, you're asking me to repeat myself from things I've said days ago. If people have acted inappropriately, I'm not going to defend that. I will happy to condemn that. But the point is that just as others in other parties have made it clear that the appropriate thing to do is wait for investigations to be concluded before we decide whether or not sanctions are appropriate and what they should be. That is the case here. And as I say, I've been told explicitly by the Gambling Commission not to discuss this. OK, well, Home Secretary James Cleverly, thank you very much indeed for coming in. It's always great to have us with you in the studio. We'll let you get back to knocking doors, whether in your shorts or your jeans. Have a good day campaigning. We'd wish that to everybody standing in the election. James Cleverly, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Well, then, let's turn to the Labour Party. Now, in a couple of weeks, Bridget Phillipson hopes to be in charge of England's classrooms if Labour gets what they want and win the election. We've talked to her before about her plans for childcare and one of Labour's main promises, which is to recruit 6,500 more teachers, paid for by taking away private schools' exemption on VAT, which they hope will raise £1.5 billion a year. So there are plenty of other things to discuss with her this morning. She's back with us in the studio. Bridget, good to have you with us. Now, I'm sure in the context of a campaign, Labour will enjoy having two embarrassing issues for the Conservatives this morning. But when it comes to Rwanda and our discussion with James Cleverly, Labour doesn't have an alternative to the Rwanda deterrent, do they? How would you put people off trying to cross the channel?
Look, as we just heard there from James Cleverly, he used slightly more, his aide used slightly more temperate language than he's used about this in the past. It's clear that this policy is not working. We've got to process cases, we've got to deal with the backlog, and alongside that, our commitment is to a border security command that will deal at source with the criminal gangs who are exploiting this. We will approach it as a national security issue. As Keir Starmer has said, he spent his time as the chief prosecutor clamping down on exactly these kinds of gangs. We are serious about doing it. We have to make sure we protect our borders. But if the Conservatives thought that this plan around Rwanda was going to work, that they were going to get flights off the ground, I'm not sure they would have called the election for now. And yet Labour has also said to us, your colleague Yvette Cooper has said to us that she would be willing to look at third country options. In other words, sending people who come here or trying to process them in other countries. And there are other countries around the EU, as James Cleverly said, starting to look at this kind of approach. What would be your alternative to actually trying to stop people even hoping to try to come to the UK in this way? Because your approach of smashing the gangs is very, very similar to what the government's already doing. No, it will focus directly at source on dealing with the issue. So our Border Security Command will have an extra 1,000 cross-border officers that will deal with the gangs, that will seek to smash the gangs. But alongside that, I think it is scandalous that we're spending millions of pounds every day on unsuitable hotel accommodation. We've got to clear that backlog. The Conservatives have completely broken the asylum system, completely broken it. They know themselves that this Rwanda gimmick isn't going to work. We've heard from the Home Secretary, the fruity language he used to describe this. We've heard from his own aide that he thinks the policy is crap. So let's just get on and do things that will actually work in making sure we secure our borders, process cases and make sure that people that don't have a right to be here are returned, because alongside that, returns have fallen through the floor.
But if you want to get more returns with the EU, there may well be a quid pro quo of having to take people from other countries. Would you rule that out?
What we've seen today, the Conservatives have been making all kinds of claims about this today. The usual desperate lies that we've seen right throughout this campaign.
What's your answer to that question?
Right. So we do need to make sure we get to a position where we have better returns agreements. And for example, that would be around family reunification, but that will be subject to negotiation. But these outlandish claims that we see in the newspapers from the Conservatives are just desperate lies. And we see this on so many areas of policy. They've got nothing positive to say about the future of our country. All they want to do is scaremonger about made-up ideas as to what Labour wouldn't actually do.
But nothing comes for free in any negotiation, whether it's with the EU or anyone else. Would you, in theory, when you're talking about returns agreements, consider taking other people from other countries? Because you said there, we might look at family reunion, and that suggests that you might well.
We will not be part of any EU quota system, and any suggestion of that kind is completely wrong. We will take a tough and firm approach in making sure that we have a functioning asylum and immigration system once. Now, we don't have that at the moment, that people that have the right to be here have their cases processed quickly, and those who are found not to have a case are returned. The Conservatives have failed on this, and all they've got now is just throwing mud around. That's all they have.
Mr. Cleverly, what our viewers want in this election campaign is us to test out your policies and not to let whoever's in that chair spend a lot of time attacking their opponents. When it comes to betting, have you ever put a bet on a political event?
No, I don't think. I think there's only a few occasions in my life where I've ever gambled, full stop. It's not really my thing. I don't think that's really the point. The issue here is that whether those people who had insider knowledge of what was going on use that information in placing a bet. People across the country will place bets. But I think there is genuine disgust amongst so many voters that what we're seeing here is pretty shocking behaviour. And Rishi Sunak promised us that his government would be different. He hasn't acted against candidates concerned. He should suspend them. And as Michael Gover said, this just reminds people of the worst excesses of the Conservatives over the last 14 years. And if people want 5 more years of this, if they want to put a stop to this and put a stop to all of this chaos, then they have to go out and vote on the 4th of July.
And again, we want to focus on your policies, just as we did with James Cleverly and the Conservatives. Now, you hope to be in charge of England's schools and education system. One of the things we know from our viewers that people really are concerned about is children and technology. And in our studio, I think many people will remember Esther Jai, the mother of the murdered teenager Brianna, spoke so movingly about what had happened, but also her belief that part of the solution to the anxiety and stress that many teenagers particularly are living with is to ban smartphones for under 16s. And a group of powerful MPs, the Education Select Committee, has also suggested that having a proper legal ban on phones in schools in England is something that's worth considering. Would you consider that?
Where it comes to schools, I don't believe that children should have their phones available to them to use during the school day. It's so much of a distraction. It causes so many problems. But the vast majority of schools already do that. So that's happening already.
But would you make it a legal ban in order that every school does it? Because I think a lot of our viewers would know fine well there are plenty of children using phones during school hours.
Well, they do it already, and schools do struggle sometimes to enforce this. Let's be clear, because not all schools, for example, would have lockers where children can put phones away. But I believe the simple, straightforward expectation is that children do not have phones that they are using during the school day. But the problem that teachers and school leaders tell me is that it's less about what goes on within school, because they can make sure that that's enforced, that kids don't have their phones available to them. but it's the consequences that follow around the school day. And sometimes what we see around social media, around bullying of young people, the rising tide of misogyny that we're seeing online, the fact that our young people are increasingly being targeted by hostile states seeking to influence and shape democratic outcomes. And our young people need to have the skills to look at what's there and in front of them and to question and to challenge. And that's what I want to deliver.
But just before we talked about a different aspect of that, on that plan and your hope that children in school shouldn't be using their phones, sometimes in the Education Select Committee say it's worth thinking about this. Actually, to make it easier for schools, you should consider actually making a ban legal, because not all schools ban it. Some head teachers believe they want legal backing from whoever's in government in order to make their life easier. So again, are you saying that you would not consider going that far and having a legal ban on phones in schools?
Schools already do this, and I expect them to enforce it. I would expect them to enforce it if I were Education Secretary. But I have to be upfront in saying that I think this is important, but I think it's part of a much bigger challenge that our young people are facing at the moment. And what school leaders tell me more widely is that they want a government that has got their back, that actually recognises the wider challenges that they're facing at the moment. And that's why, if I am Education Secretary in a Labour government, I want to reset and rebuild that relationship between government and schools and with the teaching profession, because this is one of a number of really big challenges that they're seeking to grapple with at the moment and don't feel actually valued or respected in the work that they're doing.
And as you say, there are lots of things that schools in the 2020s have to grapple with. One of them has been the concept of gender identity. Now, the government published some draft guidance which included banning teaching the idea of the concept of gender identity. It's due to start being used later in the year. If you win the election, will that still happen?
I'm afraid that, just to say, I'm not sure that's quite right, in that the government published draft guidance which was subject to consultation. The consultation is closed. At the point at which the election was called, that was being considered in terms of the responses.
But the expectation was that this would be brought in later in the year.
The principle of guidance, I think, is an important one. That's what I hear from school leaders across the country. They want clarity on how to manage what is a sensitive and difficult area for them. I think what we do need to see on this, we absolutely do need to see guidance. The Labour government, if we win the trust of the British people, will make sure that happens. But let's make sure that children's well-being is at the heart of this. Let's stop this being a political football. This is our children's lives, their well-being. It's too important to make this a culture wars issue on the front pages of newspapers. Let's take a more responsible approach, give schools the clear guidance that they need, and make sure that our young people are supported as well.
But my question is, what would your guidance be? What do you believe teachers should be advised to do? Because what the Conservative government has suggested they would do is ban the teaching of the concept of gender identity.
So I believe
is that what you would tell schools to do too?
Many aspects of the draft had good and straightforward principles in it. Other elements of it, I think, drifted far too much into partisan and unnecessary language that I think makes it harder for schools to navigate this. So if I were Education Secretary, I'd want to look at all of the responses that we've received to the consultation. I know that, for example, school leaders have flagged areas that they feel is still outstanding within the guidance. We would want to look at that, do it responsibly, work with parents, with young people and with the profession to get this right. Ministers have been rowing about this for months and months. That is not the way to deal with such
But I want to press
issue.
you on this point, because it's a very sensitive issue and it's of great importance to some people, and some teachers have felt very anxious about this. So you say some elements of the plan are okay, some are not, but would you ditch the ban on teaching the concept of gender identity?
No, there are trans people within society, and their existence should be recognised.
So you wouldn't ditch that?
This drifts, I think, sometimes into a slightly bizarre conversation. There are trans people. They have a right for their existence to be recognised. Many trans people are vulnerable and are deserving of support. Alongside that, we've got to make sure that schools have got clear guidance about how best to support children and young people that are experiencing distress and issues around their well-being. That is not well served by ministers picking fights, seeking headlines. Let's take a more responsible approach. Let's take the heat out of it. Let's do this properly and seriously.
But there are also people in the Labour movement who are very unhappy about how Labour has handled this issue. J.K. Rowling, who was a big, vocal backer and financial backer of the last Labour government, has said she's not sure she can vote Labour because of the position that the party has taken and how Keir Starmer has handled this tricky issue around the balance between the rights for women and the rights of transgender people. She said Labour has abandoned women. What do you say to her this morning?
I'm genuinely sorry to hear that, because I have a real degree of respect for J.K. Rowling and all the work that she's done on raising awareness about violence against women and girls, and that's personal to me too. I would say let's look at the work that Labour has done before in this area and what we're committed to doing now. We will halve violence against women and girls. We will make sure that those responsible face the full consequences of the law. We will go after those people that time and again, the men that time and again target women and make their lives a misery. We will put more police on our streets.
But she's talking specifically about how Labour has handled what is a very sensitive issue. She believes Labour has abandoned women. What do you say to her? It's not about what your record might be on other areas. On this issue, what would your message be to her?
I say that it's also very personal to me. I want to make sure that women get the support and the justice that they deserve, and that we do make sure that we've got services that are available for women around rape and sexual violence, and there are important provisions already there within the Equality Act that allow for single-sex provision, and it's important those are maintained. But let's alongside that make sure that trans people too get the support that they need. I don't believe it's an either or, but I would say really, do judge us on what we've done in the past to support women, and look at what we're setting out right now to make sure that we get rape prosecutions, that we tackle domestic violence, that young women in our schools feel safe, aren't experiencing sexual harassment. That's a big concern to me as well.
Let's talk about something else that's a big concern to lots of families and lots of staff and lecturers and universities around the country. Many universities are in real financial difficulties. Yeah. Now, you have called it a crisis in higher education. On a point of principle, if you become Education Secretary, would you use taxpayers' money to bail out a university that might otherwise go under?
So universities are in crisis, and I'm really concerned about that. And the challenge that we have from opposition is that I know the government have been doing work in this area to understand the full extent of what's going on in the sector. We don't have the same level of access to that. But I think we do have to tread with real care here, because universities right across our country, in our towns and cities, are really important engines of growth and opportunity and jobs. And I would want to avoid any disruption happening to young people's education, whether if an institution were to run into trouble, that would be the outcome. Now, the Office for Students has been looking at this area and are publishing some recommendations about how we get to a stronger fiscal position for our universities.
Because as you've just said, this is a very real issue, and it's a very real issue right around the country. And some universities do very much appear to be on the brink. And it's a question of principle. Would you use, if you win the election, taxpayers' cash to bail out a university?
I don't believe that will be necessary, and I think there are measures that can be taken to stabilise the sector. That will be a day one priority.
Well, what would they be? Because your manifesto has very little detail. What would those day one measures be?
So the Office for Students are looking at areas where we can strengthen financial regulation and oversight of the sector. Alongside that, I would say this is a highly complex area where the modelling on this is incredibly difficult, and we simply do not have the same level of access to any of that.
Hang on, but we're 11 days away from an election. You've been Shadow Education Secretary for quite some time. I know you must have looked in detail at this area.
We just don't get the same... No, it doesn't work in that way from a position. We don't have the same level of access to Treasury modelling and ongoing discussions that are taking place with institutions about the health of the sector. We just don't get that. What I can say, and what I can set out very clearly, is that we will make sure that once again universities are recognised as the engines for growth across our country, a public good, not a political battleground. We will not denigrate them in the way the Conservatives have done. And we will deliver a better system that is better for taxpayers, better for students and graduates, and secures the long-term future of the sector.
But are you saying then to students, parents, maybe even university vice-chancellors who might be watching this morning, good morning to them if they are you saying to them, because it sounds like you're hinting at it but you don't quite want to spell it out, are you saying that if you win the election you would not let universities go under? You would do whatever it takes to keep them afloat?
We are determined to maintain the world-leading status of our universities. They are renowned around the world. They are one of our best export industries. And within our towns and cities, they provide opportunities for adults, not just young people, to get back into training, to get a second chance where maybe things haven't worked out first time around. There are so many great examples of where that is happening. They will be essential to our plans to drive economic growth, to make sure that right across our country, people have access to well-paid, highly skilled jobs. And there will be a different relationship with our university sector if Labour wins, because we know that they are so important in so many communities, like my own in Sunderland, millions of pounds, regeneration, growth, jobs. We have to have a different approach.
Did you think Jeremy Corbyn would be a great Prime Minister?
I thought the bar was pretty low in 2019 in terms of the candidates that were there for Prime Minister. I didn't think Jeremy Corbyn was ever going to win. And that was very, very clear on the doorstep. That was very... I mean, let's be honest, it wasn't a great choice, and it certainly wasn't a great choice that the Labour put forward in 2019. The difference now, however, is that Keir Starmer has got what it takes to be a brilliant Prime Minister of our country and to turn a page on the years and years of Tory chaos and division. But that can only happen if people go out and vote for it. And I would just say people should not bother to take any interest in the polls, take nothing for granted, focus on, do you want to wake up on the 5th of July for another 5 years of all of the nonsense and division that we've seen under the Conservatives? Or do we want a better future for our country
in there at the
under
end?
Keir Starmer?
Bridget Phillipson managing to squeeze a spot of campaigning in at the end of our interview, but it's always been good to have you here in the studio with us. And just as we wish James Cleverly a good day campaigning to you and everyone else fighting in this election. Good to have you with us. Thank you. So what did you think of what you heard from Labour and the Tories this morning? You can email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk. Or if you're social media inclined, you can use the hashtag #BBCLauraK, and we will, as ever, try and get some of your views in later in the show. And the headlines of what's happening are on the BBC Live page as it unfolds. The address, it was there for you now, but I'm sure you all know how to find the BBC website. So, to our panel. Peter Mandelson, what did you think of Bridget Phillipson there? Just talk about this, what may happen in the university sector. It's not been discussed much in this campaign, but it's a big issue for people. Would Labour bail out failing universities?
Tell you one thing, I think that Bridget Phillipson, if the Labour Party is elected, is going to be a star of the government. I mean, that interview was really, really impressive, not least because, you know, she kept the campaigning until the end. Otherwise, she addressed the issues very directly. Now, on universities, this government has been sitting on its hands for years, watching the financial models of universities being crippled. They denigrate the universities, they're driving away foreign students, which have brought such revenue into our universities. They refuse to acknowledge that there is even a financial crisis in many of our universities. So I would say two things. First of all, universities themselves have a responsibility for managing their finances better. I happen to be Chancellor of Manchester Metropolitan University, which really manages its finances in an absolutely first-rate way. There are some who don't, and they've got to shape up. But secondly, we've got to recognise that our universities are a tremendous asset, not only offering opportunities and social mobility for many young people who wouldn't otherwise be able to realise the potential and the talent they have, but also absolutely central to our future prosperity. And that's why we've got to invest in them.
It's not so long ago that you were Chancellor, Philip Hammond. I mean, actually, is this a problem that you're just allowed to develop and balloon, and now there's a real nasty lurking under the bonnet?
Well, there are lots of nasties lurking under the public finance bonnet. I think that interview with Bridget Phillipson was very interesting and, frankly, a snapshot of what we've seen throughout this campaign from the Labour Party. Plenty of ideas, plenty of aspirations, but when you try to pin them down on how you deliver and what it costs, they go all vague on you. She said, we're going to halve violence against women and girls. We're going to put more police on the streets. There are measures that can be taken. You pressed her on what these measures were, but we didn't hear any answers. And I'm afraid that there is a growing concern that there is a Labour tax agenda which is being concealed. Keir Starmer is being very carefully evasive around the issue of how Labour is going to pay for all these promises. There are lots and lots of challenges in our country, in our economy, that need dealing with. But to pretend that somehow Labour can fix all the problems without spending more money, I'm afraid is simply disingenuous.
But your party's saying the opposite. You're also promising even to get rid of national insurance at some point in the future, which will cost
let me give an example.
billions and billions.
Does Bridget Phillipson really think that the government is not using all the tools and agencies available to it to treat the illegal immigration problem as a national security issue? It's probably the number one political issue in the government's focus. Of course it's using all the resources available. It's just that many of those resources will be the kind of thing that governments can't talk about openly. But the idea that Labour's just going to come in and flick a couple of switches and everything's going to be fine is incredible. The concern that I have is if the polls are right and we do get a Labour government, we have to have a strong opposition to hold them to account for all the promises that they're making and to make sure that they don't simply lurch to the left and start taxing and borrowing in a way that will drive our entrepreneurs and investors away and undermine the wealth-creating agenda that is our only long-term solution.
And just before we hear from Susanna, do you think the Rwanda policy is crap?
I'm not a big fan of the use of Rwanda, but I absolutely accept that we need a deterrence policy. I think the only way this is going to work is through deep-rooted collaboration with our European neighbours. Okay. Some of them are thinking about offshore processing as well, but it's got to be done collaboratively. Of
course, Labour and many people would say if we were still in the EU, that would be something that would be much easier to work with our European... You would say the same. Well, of course, you were a Remainer, weren't you? Susanna, what did you make of what you heard?
I think that people who have children in our schools at the moment want to hear a far more ambitious plan for what we're going to do about education. COVID absolutely decimated education for many, many people. We've seen huge numbers of teachers leaving the state system. We've seen a massive increase in vacancies. And for instance, in some specialisms, you can't get a physics teacher for love nor money. And many, many teachers are teaching outside of their specialisms. I think a lot of people who might be minded to vote Labour would say we need more money pumped into the education system. And all I've heard so far is that there would be VAT on private school fees and that would pay for 6,500 more teachers. Well, that's not enough to go around the number of schools who need more teachers. So I think that, again, there's an issue of transparency and honesty about how are we going to pay for what needs to be done to improve our schools. We've got a massive increase in mental health issues in schools. We need more support for those students. We need more support for those who want to train to be teachers. A lot of people would like to become teachers, simply can't afford to do so. So where is the money going to come from? Because I'm not sure that the VAT on private school fees is going to touch the sides.
Well, let's talk a bit more about the cash in just a second, but it's been a busy old week. So I just want to remind people what's been going on. It's time for Who Won the Week. Well, it was the last thing that Rishi Sunak needed to hear after a torrid time already, that the Gambling Commission is looking into alleged betting by 4 people on the date of the election.
If anyone is found to have broken the rules, they should not only face the full consequences of the law, well, I will ensure that they are booted out of the Conservative Party too.
J.K. Rowling dished it out to Keir Starmer as well for his answer on gender to a tough Question Time audience. Maybe they won the week. And his answer on whether he really thought Jeremy Corbyn would be a great Prime Minister. That was awkward too.
When you said Jeremy Corbyn would make a good Prime Minister, did you mean it?
Look, he would be a better Prime Minister. Well, look what we got, Boris Johnson.
And Nigel Farage has been accused of playing into Putin's hands for claims in his Panorama interview that the West provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
It was obvious to me that the ever eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving this man a reason to his Russian people to say they're coming for us again and to go to war.
And there were more revelations this weekend about Reform candidates with a range of remarks offensive to women found on social media feeds. Let's go back, Peter, to that question about tax and spend. Now, Philip Hammond said that Keir Starmer is being evasive. A lot of Conservatives would tell you Labour is going to have to put up tax. Susanna's questioning that what you want to do isn't possible without more money. So is Labour hiding a real agenda?
No, it isn't. And we are absolutely not. It is not an option for us in this country to tax our way to greater spending, whether it be on education or the health service or whatever. We have to grow the economy. We have to reverse this decline, which has kicked in Britain, frankly, since the Brexit referendum, when we took a structural step down in our trade, a structural step down in investment, structural step down in international investor confidence in our economy. Now, we can't reverse Brexit, Laura. That's not open to us. But we can decide whether we are going to sink under the weight of Brexit or whether we are going to swim, yes, against the tide in order to overcome or at least offset many of its disadvantages. And I am a swimmer, not a sinker in this. We've got to look at this situation as a trigger, as a catalyst for turning round our economy. And we've got to look at two things in my view. We've got to look at, you mentioned universities. We've got to look to our great research-intensive universities where our first-class science and technology base exists, and we've got to see how we can mobilise and galvanise that base and commercialise it to create new businesses and industries out of that base. And secondly, we've got a massive pensions and savings sector in this country. We've got to make sure that that money, that liquidity is more efficiently put into industry, put into business, rather than going overseas and just buying government bonds.
Briefly, though, Philip Hammond, I mean, every politician that sits in the studio says they want to grow the economy.
Exactly. And the idea that Labour has some silver bullet to fix the economy is simply nonsense. The challenges are deep-rooted. They go back to the global financial crisis.
Did I talk about a silver bullet?
They go back to the global financial crisis. What people need to hear from the Labour Party is how it is going to deliver this additional economic growth. And what I think we all need to be reassured about is that as a Labour government finds in its second or third year that it isn't delivering that magic economic growth, it will get dragged inexorably to the left by the forces of the left within the Labour Party, within its trade union support base, and we need a strong opposition in Parliament to make sure that we hold this Labour government, if that's what we get, to account.
Susanna, when politicians talk about wanting growth, do you think your viewers and our viewers this morning sort of believe them?
Well, I mean, who doesn't want growth? You know, we need growth. It's hugely important. I think part of the driver of growth is a really strong education system. I'd really like more investment in the education system. And it used to be that the Labour Party said that those with the broadest shoulders should be able to pay a little bit more. And we're definitely not hearing that message right now from the Labour Party. OK, well, we're back with you three a bit later in the programme. Time always goes so quickly on a Sunday morning. But let's get on with looking at some of the numbers. Now, neither of the parties really believe the polls, which have, for better or worse, become part of the campaign themselves. But there's been wild variation in them. So what should we do? Well, let's have a calm assessment of what's really going on. Here is John Curtis with 60 Seconds on Sunday.
Neither the Conservatives nor Labour are having a fruitful campaign. The latest polls put both of them down 4 points compared with the outset. But that means the Conservatives on 20% are still 20 points behind Labour. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage's Reform UK party is now just 2 points behind the Tories. But the worst news for the Conservatives has come from 5 megapolls that estimated the likely outcome in seats. Their tally for the Tories ranged widely, from 53 to 155, but even 155 would be the party's worst result ever. And crucially, all these megapolls said Conservative support is falling most heavily in constituencies the party is defending, compounding its losses. Conservative support has fallen by a couple of points in Scotland too, but this is of little comfort to the SNP, who, on 32%, trail Labour by 4 points.
Well, let's get straight on with that then. John said it's looking grisly for the SNP in their current tally of 43 of the 59 Scottish seats in the House of Commons. The arrival of the experienced Minister, John Swinney, as the first Minister after a torrid time was meant to be the start of a more peaceful era for the SNP. But 6 weeks into the job, he's fighting a general election. And I'm pleased to say that he's with us for the first time on the programme now. Good morning, Mr Swinney. I just want to start by asking about a developing story today. Now, viewers should know it's against the rules for taxpayers' cash to be used in campaigning. But there have been allegations over the last week that SNP staff members have been using stamps paid for with public money for campaign purposes. And the Mail on Sunday today says someone in your office was involved in discussions about doing that, allegedly using material paid for by the public purse. What do you say to that?
Well, I've obviously discussed this with my staff, and I've been assured that no parliamentary stamps that have been provided by Parliament have been used to support election purposes. And obviously the Parliament has said that they're looking into this matter, and obviously will provide Parliament with any assistance that they require as they undertake those inquiries.
One WhatsApp message reported this morning sent to an SNP group chat, your assistant wrote, "The stamp fairy is very useful when it comes to campaigns." Who's the stamp fairy?
Well, we campaign on a regular basis in my capacity as a Member of Parliament, so we're engaging with the public on a countless range of different issues. So I think these are sort of humorous remarks made in a WhatsApp channel, and what's important is the reassurance that I've had that parliamentary stamps have not been used for election purposes.
It might sound like quite a small issue, and maybe that's just a humorous message, but there's a hugely important principle here about public money being used for campaigning purposes by political parties. Are you completely sure that your party has not been using any public money to fund your election campaign?
I'm confident of that. We've obviously been engaging in a fundraising campaign to support the election campaign. It's been supported by the many members that we have around about the country. The Scottish National Party is fortunate that we have the largest membership of any political party in Scotland. Indeed, we've got more members than all the other parties combined, and those members have been supporting our election campaign and enabling us to have the resources available to us generated and raised from within our party membership base to support us in our campaigning activity.
You've got a lot fewer members than you used to have, and part of that is because of concerns that many voters in Scotland also share about standards in the SNP. I mean, if we just look at the recent past, you had the scandal around Alex Salmond, the former First Minister's behaviour. Nicola Sturgeon was arrested. You have the party's former chief executive charged with embezzlement. Now, you're a very well-respected politician who's been around the SNP for a long time. Would you understand if voters wanted to punish you at this election for all of that that's gone on?
We've had a tough time, Laura, and I think that's been acknowledged. I've acknowledged that on a constant basis since I became First Minister just about 7 weeks ago, and I've been very candid about the fact that I recognise that the SNP has had that tough time, and that my job is to rebuild the trust between the public of Scotland and the Scottish National Party. That's what I'm focused on as First Minister. Obviously, I've come into an election campaign very quickly after becoming First Minister. But I acknowledge, and I've always acknowledged this in my representation of those who've chosen me to go to Parliament, that you have got to work constantly to build the trust that you experience with members of the public, and that's exactly what I will do as leader of the Scottish National Party and as the First Minister of Scotland.
Well, let's talk about whether voters can trust some of the promises you're making this time round, because your manifesto says if you win a majority of Scottish seats in the general election, that you would push again for a referendum on Scottish independence. But the Tories have said no. The courts have said that the SNP can't do that on its own. And just a couple of days ago, Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, also said he wouldn't talk about it. So you're making a promise again that you wouldn't be able to keep.
I think this is really in the hands of the people of Scotland, to be honest, and it's a deeply democratic question. In 2021, the people of Scotland elected a parliament that was committed to holding an independence referendum and which supported independence. And essentially, the United Kingdom government has not enabled that view, that expression of opinion by the people of Scotland to be put into democratic effect. So what I'm saying in this election is that if people in Scotland want us to progress on the arguments about independence, if they want Scotland to be an independent country, then they've got to support the Scottish National Party as the only means of ensuring that can come about. And we cannot allow the Westminster political parties to deny the people of Scotland their democratic rights and their democratic opportunity to decide their own constitutional future, because that's a fundamental point at the heart of our democracy.
But the fundamental point, and I know you don't like it, is that Westminster has the power to say no to going any further along that road. Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak have both said repeatedly they will not talk about it. So your promise to voters in this election is a promise that you would not be able to keep. And that's your decision to put it front and centre of your manifesto.
It is, because I think it's an essential solution to the issues that people face in their lives today. So if you look at the challenges of public spending cuts, which you've talked about in this programme, the devastating effect of Brexit on our country and our economy, and the impact of the cost of living, these are all issues that have been delivered by Westminster. These are all problems created by Westminster decision-making of forcing us out of the European Union against the will of people in Scotland, and in the prolonging of public spending cuts, which is what the Labour Party will do when they come to office. Now, my answer to that is to make sure that decisions about the future of Scotland are made in Scotland for Scotland, and that can only come about if people are prepared to vote for that in the forthcoming general election, and to give us the electoral support and the political support that will enable us to deliver a referendum on independence, because that is the secure route of ensuring the people of Scotland are able to decide on their own constitutional future and be able to address these devastating impacts of austerity and Brexit and the cost of living, which are really causing severe damage within Scottish economy and Scottish society.
Except that everybody watching, particularly in Scotland, will know that you have repeatedly promised to do this when you've had a majority of MPs in Scotland for many years. You've had power in Holyrood in the Scottish Parliament for many years, and it's not something that you've been able to deliver thus far, and you're making the same promise again. You say that this is about democracy. If you don't get a majority of Scottish seats in this election, will you accept that means it's the will of the Scottish people that they don't want to have another independence referendum?
Well, I'm not going to prejudge the outcome of the election, which is just in about 12 days' time.
Hang on, you can't have it both ways. You're saying if you have a majority, you would do this, but if you don't have a majority, then not answer that part of the question. So if you don't have a majority, will you accept that is the Scottish electorate telling you they don't want to pursue independence right now?
The Scottish Parliament was elected in 2021 with a majority of members for a 5-year term committed to the delivery of a referendum on independence and to delivering Scottish independence if that was supported in the referendum. I think that democratic mandate from the people of Scotland, clearly given, has got to be delivered. And I think this election is an opportunity for us to advance those arguments. But it's crystal clear that people in Scotland have expressed a preference to determine their own constitutional future. And I think Westminster should remove the obstacles that are stopping Scotland from having that choice.
But that was in 2021. There is about to be a big vote in 2024. If you lose support at this general election, do you accept that will mean that you are losing support for independence? That is surely the simple democratic logic.
Well, the democratic logic is that the people of Scotland have had their democratic will thwarted since 2021. And I invite people in Scotland in this election on a week on Thursday to make sure that they exercise their view and their voice to make sure we have that strongest demonstration possible of the support that is necessary to deliver Scottish independence and to make sure that Westminster stops blocking the democratic aspirations of the people of Scotland.
Just on one final point, you were Education Secretary in one of your many jobs you've done in the Scottish administration. Now, under your party, Scottish education has slid down the international rankings to the disappointment of many people. But we've talked a lot on our programme about what happens with children and phones in the classroom. Bridget Phillipson said that she will make sure that head teachers in England keep phones out of schools if she wins as part of the Labour Party at this election. I know the Scottish Government has got guidance coming on this shortly. Would you give schools a similar instruction? Should head teachers keep phones out of Scottish classrooms?
We're looking very carefully at this issue because, as your interview with Bridget Phillipson demonstrated, there are a range of different perspectives on this question. Some teachers believe that having phones available to young people assists the education process. Others believe it is very disruptive to classroom cohesion and to the cohesion of schools. So there's a careful route to be constructed here, but we are working very closely with the education system to make sure we have firm and clear guidance in place, because we cannot have a situation where mobile phone technology is disruptive to the education process, and we must ensure that we are supporting teachers and the education profession and making sure the objectives that we have for the education system are properly and fully realised by having a supportive environment within the classroom and a stable environment within the classroom as well.
OK, First Minister, I think that is a maybe, but just as everybody who we've had on the programme this morning, we wish you a happy day on the campaign trail. We've been saying that to all of our politicians who've been with us this morning. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme. It's great to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's return to our panel then. Scottish politics has been certainly in flux in the last few years, but in the last couple of weeks, right-wing politics has been in flux. Philip Hammond, as you're here, I have to ask you about what is going on with Nigel Farage. Now, huge story in the last couple of days about his attitude to NATO and Ukraine, but many of your people in your party believe you should do more to accommodate his kind of politics, and that's the solution. What do you say to them?
Well, I say to them that they're wrong. We should have no truck with Nigel Farage and this right-wing populism which tries to pretend that there are simple, easy solutions for the deep-rooted challenges and problems that the country has. There are no quick fixes, there are no free lunches, and the kind of snake oil that Nigel Farage is peddling, in my view, has no place in our democratic politics. And his exposure now as an apologist for Putin, this country's direct adversary and a threat to the security of all of us, means that he should play no part in our democratic politics.
Why do you think?
I just wish we'd held the election later, by which time I'm sure he would have disappeared off to America to play games with Mr. Trump.
Did you tell Rishi Sunak he should wait a bit?
I'm afraid I don't have that kind of access. But I see, and just to conclude the point, I hope we will not hear any more from any of my colleagues in the Conservative Party suggesting that there is a route for Nigel Farage into the Conservative Party. There is no space for Nigel Farage in the Conservative Party.
Susanna, though, lots of people do find him appealing. Lots of people do want to listen to him. Lots of people do find him interesting and maybe entertaining. Why do you think that is?
Well, if you look at the polls, there was a poll which showed that he was going to overtake the Tories in terms of votes. Look, we interviewed Nigel Farage on our programme, Good Morning Britain, this week and challenged him on the fact that, there's a quality problem with a number of his candidates, 41 of them, friends on Facebook with somebody who's described as a fascist leader. He said that's a problem with vetting. I'm not sure how much vetting money you need to put into checking whether your candidates are friends with fascists on social media. And that's not just liking a post or looking at one. It's actually, making a positive connection with one. That's a worry, and that's something that he certainly needs to get on top of.
Peter Mandelson, just finally to you. Labour is by nature superstitious, maybe even a touch paranoid. But should they be, or how seriously do you think they are really preparing for government now?
I think they are very seriously preparing for government, and I think you heard that from Bridget Phillipson this morning. Can I just say, though, you didn't ask us anything about John Swinney and his interview, and I think the reason for that is that it's perfectly clear the game's up for the SNP. Yeah. What the Scottish people now need is not an SNP-led government that's going to go head-to-head the entire time with the UK government. They need Scottish people in a newly elected Labour government that will get benefits for Scotland. The SNP has become structurally irrelevant to the Scottish people. So that's just to make that point, if you don't mind. But secondly, absolutely central. I'm sorry to keep going on about this, and Philip, I didn't talk about a silver bullet. The task of turning around this country and rebuilding our economy is a long-term one. It's not a short-term one. Yes, we can make some quick changes, and yes, we can take some early steps to change things in our health service, our schools, and fighting crime on the streets. But everything we want to do in the long term depends on turning around and rebuilding our economy.
Okay.
And that has to be central to what a new Labour government does.
Okay, well,
They don't have a plan to do it.
Well, I think
they have an aspiration, but
I think they do have a plan, and if you had just 5 more minutes, Philip, I'd be very happy to sketch
We
it
never
out.
have 5 more minutes. We've already extended it 15 minutes today because there's so much to talk about. But even then, we are now out of time. I wish we were a longer-term programme, but it's been great having all three of you with us this morning. And I know, of course, that politicians of every stripe will still be out fighting for every single vote. There is 11 days to go and nothing is settled. A huge thank you to my trio at the desk. The biggest thanks to you, of course, for watching at home as the clock ticks louder and louder to polling day. For all that the two main party leaders are known for being straight-laced, maybe not so exciting, some of the events in this campaign have been pretty wild. So who knows what will happen by the time we meet again. I'll be with Clive Myrie on Wednesday night on BBC One after the next clash between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. I'll be on this Sunday's newscast with Paddy O'Connell, which will pop up on BBC Sounds later on today. But I will most of all look forward to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place. Goodbye for now.